The bridge of the UNS Dauntless wasn't exactly living up to its name. Sweat dripped down the back of Captain Thalos Zephyr's neck as he scanned the data on the holographic display. The Gralax Armada was on their tail, closer than a politician to a bribe. And they weren't here to negotiate. No, they were here with a gravity weapon that could squash planets like they were grapes under a boot. A boot that had a mean streak and no qualms about collateral damage. "How's it looking, Captain?" Lieutenant Vera Black asked from her station, her fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist who's lost her sheet music and is just winging it. "Oh, you know," Thalos replied, scratching his chin with a hand that betrayed more nerves than he'd admit. "Just another day of trying not to get obliterated by a weapon that turns planets into pancakes." Vera snorted, a sound halfway between a chuckle and a death rattle. "At least they'll have something to put on the galactic breakfast menu." Thalos smirked despite himself. It was either laugh or cry, and crying wasn't going to keep the fleet from being flattened. "Any bright ideas on how not to end up as garnish?" "Well," Vera said, leaning back in her chair, "we could always ask them nicely to stop. Maybe offer them some of our dwindling rations. I'm sure they'd love our recycled air and cardboard-flavored protein bars," Thalos said dryly. "Get Jenkins on the comms. I need to know how soon we can jump." As Vera hailed the engineering deck, Thalos studied the fleet's trajectory. They were running low on everything that mattered: fuel, food, and morale. And when you're being chased by hammer-wielding maniacs, those things tend to be important. Jenkins' voice crackled over the comm, sounding like he'd been gargling nails. "Engineering here. What's the good word, Captain? Tell me we can make the jump before the Gralax catch up and give us an up-close demonstration of their gravity party trick." "Well, if by make the jump you mean barely scrape by on fumes and a prayer, then yes, we can jump," Jenkins replied. "But I'm gonna need at least another 15 minutes to make sure we don't end up smeared across several light years." Thalos pinched the bridge of his nose. 15 minutes, huh? How fast do you think the Gralax can smash us?" "Depends. How long does it take to flatten a bug under a boot?" Vera shook her head, a wry smile on her lips. "This is what we get for cutting corners on the fleet's budget." "Next time, remind me to vote for the guy who promises better apocalypse proofing," Thalos replied, turning back to Jenkins. "Do what you can, Jenkins. And try not to blow us up in the process." "You got it, Captain. I'll save the fireworks for the Gralax." Thalos cut the comm and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a whole lot of people were counting on him to keep them alive. "No pressure, Captain," Vera said, her voice suddenly serious. "Incoming message from the Gralax." "Great," Thalos muttered. "Patch it through. Might as well hear their demands before they turn us into space confetti." The holographic display flickered, and an image of a Gralax officer appeared. With skin like molten rock and eyes that gleamed like high beams on a deserted highway, the Gralax wasn't winning any beauty contests. "Humans," the Gralax officer intoned in a voice that sounded like two asteroids grinding together. "You are ordered to surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in your total annihilation." "Well, that's charming," Thalos replied, not really caring if the Gralax understood sarcasm. "And here I thought you just wanted to talk about the weather." The Gralax officer didn't flinch. "Surrender now, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be crushed." "Thanks for the options," Thalos said, cutting the transmission. "They're so tempting. I almost forgot the part where we don't want to die." Vera shook her head. "And people say we're the unreasonable ones." "People have been saying a lot of things," Thalos replied, checking the fleet status. "Mostly stuff like, run, and screaming, and why didn't we listen to the guy who said the Gralax were bad news?" "We've got about 10 minutes before the Gralax catch up," Vera said, her fingers flying over the console. "Any brilliant last-minute plans?" "Well, I was thinking we could all pretend to be dead and hope they just leave," Thalos said, leaning back and rubbing his temples. "Or we could use our secret weapon," Vera suggested with a grin. "What secret weapon? The one where we have Jenkins throw insults at them until they get so mad they leave?" "Hey, it worked at the last strategy meeting," Vera pointed out. Thalos chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "We really are screwed, aren't we?" "Looks that way," Vera said with a shrug. "But at least we get to go out in style." Thalos nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Yeah, nothing says style like being squashed by a gravity weapon." The next few minutes passed in tense silence, each second ticking away like a countdown to doom. Thalos kept one eye on the stars, the other on the display that showed the Gralax closing in. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, only it was his train, and it was about to become a very brief and very unpleasant footnote in the history of the universe. "Captain," Jenkins' voice crackled over the comm again. "We're ready for the jump." "Finally, some good news," Thalos said, straightening up. "Take us out of here, Jenkins." The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life, and for a brief moment, Thalos felt the familiar pull of gravity release its grip on him. The stars stretched and blurred, and the Dauntless leapt forward into the void, leaving the Gralax and their gravity weapon behind. Well, Vera said, exhaling slowly. That was fun. Sure, if by fun you mean utterly terrifying, Thalos replied. Let's not do that again anytime soon. Agreed, Vera said, glancing at the display. Looks like we're clear for now. For now, Thalos echoed, watching as the stars returned to their normal, non-death-inducing state. But we can't keep this up forever. So what do? We find a way to turn the tables, Thalos said, his voice firm. Or at least buy ourselves enough time to figure out how not to get crushed like bugs. Vera nodded, her expression serious. And if that doesn't work? Thalos leaned back, folding his arms. Then we'll go out with a bang the Gralax won't forget. The ship's comm crackled again, a harsh reminder that even in the depths of space, there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. Incoming transmission from the fleet, Jenkins announced. It's from Admiral Kestrel. Patch him through, Thalos said, bracing himself for the inevitable dressing down. The Admiral's face appeared on the display, looking as stern as ever. Captain Zephyr, he said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unresolved grievances. I trust you managed to avoid annihilation, for the moment at least. For now, Admiral, Thalos replied, trying not to sound like the cornered animal he felt like. But we'll need a new plan if we're going to survive the next round. I've already got my best people working on it, Kestrel said, though he didn't sound particularly optimistic. In the meantime, keep your crew on their toes and your eyes open. The Gralax won't give up easily. Understood, sir, Thalos said, ending the transmission. You heard the Admiral, Vera. Keep looking for options, like finding a way to make the Gralax laugh so hard they forget about squashing us. At this point, I'd take a bad joke over a gravity weapon, Thalos said with a wry smile. The Dauntless floated on through the emptiness of space, a small ship full of weary humans trying to outwit the universe itself. And somewhere out there, lurking in the dark, the Gralax were waiting, eager for another shot at making humanity a footnote in their history books. But Thalos Zephyr wasn't about to give them the satisfaction, not while there was still breath in his lungs and a sarcastic comment on his lips. Keep us moving, Vera, he said, staring out into the star-filled void. We've got a long way to go. The UNS Dauntless drifted through the abyss like a lost child with a penchant for mischief. Captain Thalos Zephyr sat at the helm, a cup of what passed for coffee in one hand, and a holographic report in the other. The situation, as usual, was dire. Incoming message from the Gralax, Vera Black announced, her tone doing the impossible by sounding both bored and terrified. Thalos sighed, setting down his coffee. Let me guess, another heartfelt plea for peace and understanding. More like a demand wrapped in bureaucratic red tape, Vera replied, swiping through the holographic files with the enthusiasm of a sloth on a Monday morning. Patch it through, Thalos ordered, already bracing for the onslaught of legalese that was the Gralax's second most powerful weapon, right after planet-smashing gravity hammers. The display flickered to life, presenting a Gralax officer who looked like he'd been sculpted out of volcanic rock and left to stew in a suit that screamed, hostile takeover. Humans of the UNS Dauntless, the Gralax droned, his voice painfully slow and laced with enough formality to choke a diplomat. You are hereby instructed to surrender within the next 6 hours. Failure to comply will result in your complete and utter obliteration. Well, isn't that just the friendliest invitation to a funeral I've ever received? Thalos muttered under his breath. Do they ever get tired of their own doom and gloom? Makes you wonder if they started as motivational speakers, Vera said, her eyes rolling so hard they nearly completed a full rotation. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in a silence as thick as the tension that hung over them. 6 hours, Thalos repeated, as if saying it out loud might somehow make it more manageable. Barely enough time to order pizza and watch it arrive. We'll need more than a pepperoni special to get through this, Vera quipped. Besides, delivery's been hell ever since the Gralax decided they wanted to be the only ones serving the universe. Thalos turned to his holographic display, attempting to decipher the Gralax's bureaucratic ultimatum. Rows of alien script danced across the screen, mocking him with their complexity. Juno Vex better get here fast, he said, rubbing his temples. Because if there's one thing I hate more than being shot at, it's being buried in paperwork. Right on cue, the bridge doors hissed open, and Juno Vex strode in. She was the ship's resident strategist, a woman with a brain like a supercomputer and a tongue like a scalpel. Captain, Juno greeted, her voice as sharp as ever. Heard we got ourselves a new deadline. Something about annihilation in 6 hours? That's the gist of it, Thalos replied, gesturing to the holographic display. Think you can make sense of this mess? Juno smirked, stepping up to the console. I'll take a look. I just love cracking open a fresh can of Gralax bureaucracy. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube made of misery. Is it really that bad? Vera asked, curious despite herself. Worse, Juno replied, scanning the data with practiced efficiency. Imagine trying to decode a message written by a lawyer who's been paid by the word. And that lawyer is also a masochist. Thalos chuckled, though it was more out of desperation than amusement. Well, if anyone can crack it, Juno, it's you. Juno worked her magic on the console, her fingers dancing over the controls with the precision of a concert pianist who'd swapped bark for interstellar diplomacy. So, Vera said, breaking the silence, how do we buy more time when the stopwatch is about to hit 0? By finding loopholes, Juno said, her eyes glued to the display. The Gralax love their rules, but they're not infallible. If we can exploit their own red tape, we might squeeze out a few more precious hours. Which we can then spend contemplating how screwed we are, Vera added, a wry grin on her face. Exactly, Juno agreed, her focus unwavering. It's a win-win. Thalos shook his head, marveling at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag crew of humans, trying to outwit an alien armada with nothing more than sarcasm and stubbornness. Jenkins, Thalos called over the comm, hoping the engineer was still in one piece. Yeah, Captain, Jenkins rasped, his voice as gravelly as ever. How's the engine holding up? Like a drunk on a tightrope, Jenkins replied. It's holding, but I wouldn't bet my last credit on it. Do what you can to keep us ready for another jump, Thalos instructed. We'll need every second we can buy. Roger that, Jenkins said. I'll keep her steady. Just don't ask for miracles. No miracles, Thalos promised. Just a little luck and a whole lot of sarcasm. That I can do, Jenkins chuckled, signing off. Thalos returned his attention to Juno, who was still knee-deep in Gralax legalese. How's it looking, Juno? Like a bureaucratic nightmare, she replied, not looking up. But I think I've found something. Do tell, Vera encouraged, leaning forward with interest. The Gralax ultimatum has clauses, Juno explained, her eyes lighting up with the thrill of the hunt. Lots of them, and one of those clauses stipulates that hostilities must be paused if there's a dispute over the wording of the ultimatum itself. You're kidding, Thalos said, incredulous. We can stall them with a grammar lesson. Juno grinned, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Essentially, yes. If we challenge the phrasing, they have to stop their countdown until it's resolved. That's brilliant, Vera said, a newfound hope sparking in her voice. We can drag this out, buy ourselves the time we need. Exactly, Juno agreed. It's not much, but it's a start. Thalos let out a long breath, the weight of the situation momentarily lifting. All right, we'll contest their ultimatum. Vera, get communications ready. Let's see if we can beat the Gralax at their own game. On it, Vera replied, her fingers flying over the console. As the crew scrambled to prepare their response, Thalos found himself staring out at the void once more. The stars twinkled innocently, indifferent to the chaos unfolding beneath their gaze. It was strangely comforting, in a way, knowing that no matter how dire things became, the universe would keep on spinning, laughing at their misfortune from a safe distance. Vera, Thalos said, his voice steady. Open a channel to the Gralax. Aye, Captain, Vera confirmed, her tone all business now. Channel open. Thalos squared his shoulders, adopting the air of a man who wasn't about to let a bunch of rock-skinned aliens get the better of him. Gralax Armada, this is Captain Thalos Zephyr of the UNS Dauntless. We formally contest the phrasing of your ultimatum. There was a pause, as though the universe itself had drawn a sharp breath. Then, the Gralax officer reappeared on the display, his expression one of surprise mingling with thinly veiled disdain. Contest, the Gralax repeated, as if the word tasted strange on his tongue. On what grounds? Ambiguity, Thalos replied, injecting just enough confidence into his voice to sell the lie. Your demand for surrender lacks clarity and is therefore disputable under interstellar law. The Gralax officer looked like he'd just bitten into something sour. Preposterous. Perhaps, Thalos conceded, but those are the rules, aren't they? The Gralax hesitated, clearly wrestling with the notions of protocol and his desire to reduce the Dauntless to space debris. Finally, he nodded, albeit reluctantly. Very well, he said, the words grudging. We will pause hostilities while your grievance is reviewed. Thank you, Thalos said, faux graciousness dripping from his voice. We appreciate your cooperation. The transmission ended, and Thalos allowed himself a small, victorious smile. It wasn't a win, not by a long shot, but it was a delay, and in their line of work, delays were as good as gold. Nice work, Captain, Juno said, a hint of admiration in her tone. Don't thank me just yet, Thalos replied, his smile fading. We've bought ourselves some time, but not much. We need a real plan, and fast. Agreed, Vera chimed in. Let's dig through what resources we have left and see if there's anything we can use to our advantage. More like what scraps we can piece together, Thalos muttered. But it's better than standing around waiting to be squashed. The bridge hummed with activity as the crew set to work, each person a cog in the desperate machine that was their survival. Thalos watched them, feeling both pride and a gnawing anxiety that threatened to swallow him whole. We'll figure something out, Juno said, as if sensing his unease. We always do. Thalos nodded, though the weight of leadership was a constant pressure on his shoulders. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on fumes. But they were human, damn it, and if there's one thing humans excelled at, it was surviving against impossible odds. Keep us moving, he instructed, his voice firm. We'll find a way. As the Dauntless continued its journey through the vast, uncaring void, Thalos couldn't help but think about the Gralax. They saw humans as little more than interstellar nuisances, pests to be eradicated. But he knew better, and if it came down to it, he would make sure they knew it too. Because underestimating humanity was the kind of mistake that even a stone-hearted alien might regret. Captain Thalos Zephyr leaned back in the command chair, feigning the confidence of a man who hadn't just sidestepped annihilation by arguing grammar with a rock-skinned alien. Right, everyone, he said, trying to sound more composed than he felt. We've bought some time, let's use it to figure out what the hell we're actually going to do. Lieutenant Vera Black was already on it, her fingers a blur as she coaxed the ship's dwindling systems to life. Well, unless Jenkins found a way to turn sarcasm into fuel, we're still running on empty. Pretty sure sarcasm's a renewable resource on this ship, Thalos muttered, craning his neck to watch Juno Vex, the resident strategist, who was still poking at the Gralax ultimatum like it might spring to life and bite her. Juno, he called, tell me you found something in that legal mumbo-jumbo we can twist into our favor. Juno's eyes flicked up, a glint of mischief burning bright. You know, Captain, I may just have found our golden ticket, she said, a smirk tugging at her lips. Do enlighten us, Vera quipped, not looking up from her console. The suspense is killing me. Juno tapped the display, bringing up a new set of symbols. Turns out, the Gralax have been a little too clever for their own good. They included a clause about honorable surrender, whatever the hell that means in their dialect of rock and roll. Let me guess, Thalos said, honor's the type of thing that's hard to define when you're dealing with a species that thinks of rocks as pets. Exactly, Juno replied. If we challenge their definition of honorable, they'll have to pause the countdown again to argue the point. And I've got a sneaking suspicion they don't actually have a definition. Vera let out a low whistle. So, we keep them chasing their own tails while we brainstorm how not to become stardust. That's the idea, Juno confirmed. We can stall for time while we figure out something more concrete. Thalos nodded, a plan forming in his mind despite the oppressive weight of their situation. All right, let's keep them on the line. Meanwhile, we need to address our own problems. Jenkins, he said, activating the comm system, what's the deal with our supplies? Jenkins' voice crackled through the speakers, sounding like he was chewing on gravel, and enjoying it. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel, Captain. Hyperdrive's more temperamental than a cat on bath day, and the power cells are running lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. Good to know you're still a well of optimism, Thalos replied dryly. Anything we can do to stretch what we have. If you can turn optimism into energy, we'll be set for life, Jenkins grumbled. Otherwise, we're living on borrowed time and luck. Great, just what I wanted to hear, Thalos said, rubbing his forehead. Do what you can, Jenkins. Even if it's just tying everything together with duct tape and hope. On it, Captain, Jenkins replied, and Thalos ended the call, feeling a headache rapidly brewing. We need a miracle, Vera stated, echoing the unsaid thoughts of everyone on the bridge. If I could order one, I would, Thalos replied, a bitter edge to his words. But until then, we need to dig deeper. Juno, any intel on the Gralax fleet? Anything we can exploit? Juno's fingers danced over the console, pulling up a tactical display of their adversaries. They're a big fleet, no doubt about it, but they're not infallible. We've noticed a pattern in their maneuvers, like they follow a strict formation. Why is that a good thing? Vera asked, skepticism lacing her tone. Because strict patterns are predictable, Juno explained. If we can anticipate their moves, we might just slip through their fingers. Thalos considered this, nodding slowly. All right, we'll work with that, but first, let's make life a little more difficult for them. Vera, open a channel again. Let's challenge them to define honorable surrender. Vera grinned, delighted at the idea of poking the proverbial bear. Channel open, Captain. Once more, the Gralax officer appeared, his expression one of weary annoyance. What now, Captain Zephyr? Thalos gave his best apologetic smile. Apologies for the inconvenience, but we've got a little problem with your ultimatum's definition of honorable surrender. Care to clarify? The Gralax blinked, clearly not expecting this latest curveball. Clarify, he repeated, as though Thalos had just asked him to recite the sonnets of Shakespeare in Klingon. That's right, Thalos pressed. We need to know exactly what constitutes honorable in this context. Otherwise, we can't proceed with negotiations. The alien's expression darkened with irritation, and Thalos could almost hear the grinding of stone beneath his skin. This is preposterous. Maybe, Thalos conceded, but those are your rules, aren't they? The Gralax officer's gaze was sharp enough to cut glass, but he nodded reluctantly. Very well, hostilities will pause while we review your request. As the transmission cut, Vera and Juno exchanged victorious glances. Nice work, Captain, Vera said, her grin wide and cheeky. We'll have them chasing their tails for a while with that one. Thanks, Thalos replied, though he didn't feel too victorious. Every minute counted, but they needed more than delay tactics. They needed an actual plan. All right, Thalos said, refocusing. Let's get to work. We need a real solution, not just stalling tactics. Ideas? Juno leaned back in her chair, contemplative. If we can disrupt their formation, maybe create a diversion, they might scatter just long enough for us to slip through. Not a bad thought, Thalos said. What kind of diversion are we talking about? Explosives, Juno replied, her eyes gleaming with a wicked idea. Big ones. We've got a few old warheads in storage, right? We rig them to go off, make it look like we're mounting a counterattack. Vera looked intrigued. You're thinking a space fireworks show? Exactly, Juno confirmed. We set them off on a delay, make it look like a threat. They scrambled to respond, we make our move. Sounds risky, Thalos said, but a grin tugged at his lips. But I like it. I'll get Jenkins on it, Vera said, already communicating the plan to the engineer, who would no doubt relish the chance to blow something up, even if it was just to buy them time. Thalos felt the mood on the bridge lift, just a fraction. Resourcefulness and stubbornness, those were human traits, and they'd use them for all they were worth. Let's keep moving, he ordered. We've got a plan, and we need to make it work. As the crew scattered to their tasks, Thalos allowed himself a moment to breathe, staring out into the vast, uncaring space beyond. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on fumes, but they had each other, and they had a plan. And in the grand scheme of things, that was a hell of a lot better than nothing. Meanwhile, in the bowels of the Dauntless, Jenkins was in his element, or at least what passed for it. Half the ship's systems were jury-rigged with spare parts and anything else he could scavenge. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Mostly. Jenkins, Vera's voice crackled through the comms, we've got a job for you. Just what I needed, Jenkins grumbled, wiping his grimy hands on an even grimier rag. What's up? Thalos wants fireworks, Vera explained, outlining Juno's plan. Fireworks, huh? Jenkins mused, considering the proposal. Might as well give them a light show before we go dark. Can you get it done? Vera asked, her tone hopeful. Yeah, I'll just pull a rabbit out of a hat while I'm at it, Jenkins replied. But sure, I can rig the warheads. Give me a bit. You're a miracle worker, Jenkins, Vera said, her voice warm with gratitude. Don't go making me blush now, Jenkins replied. I'll get it done. Just keep the Gralax off my back while I work. Back on the bridge, Thalos was coordinating the rest of their plan, and for once, things seemed to be going their way. He could practically feel the tension in the air, but it was tempered by a cautious optimism. They might just pull this off. All right, everyone, Thalos said, rallying his crew. This is our shot. We use the diversion, make our move, and get the hell out of here. Let's show the Gralax what happens when they underestimate humans. There was a murmur of agreement, resolve hardening in the eyes of every crew member. They were ready as they could be. The countdown continued. Supplies dwindled. Morale was a fragile thing, but desperation bred creativity, and Thalos was betting everything on that one small, human truth. Hours later, Jenkins' voice crackled over the comms, grim satisfaction coloring his tone. Warheads rigged and ready, Captain. Thank you, Jenkins, Thalos replied, his voice steady. Vera, get that channel open. Let's start phase 2. As the Gralax officer appeared on screen yet again, Thalos took a deep breath. Gralax Armada, he said, we've prepared our response. You might want to brace yourselves. The Gralax officer's eyes narrowed, suspicious. What are you planning, Captain? We're humans, Thalos said, a wry grin spreading across his face. We improvise. And with that, the Dauntless began to move, their plan set in motion. Explosions detonated in the distance, a chaotic dance of light and sound, and the Gralax fleet scrambled to respond. Go, 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 Thalos urged, adrenaline surging through his veins as the Dauntless slipped through the chaos, making their break for freedom. As the stars blurred past them, Thalos couldn't help but let out a breathless laugh. Against impossible odds, they'd found a way through. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they'd bought themselves time to fight, time to think, time to live. And for now, that was enough. The UNS Dauntless cruised through the star-speckled void, a battered tin can with a hell of a attitude. Thalos Zephyr, captain by necessity, leaned back in his chair, which protested loudly, reminding everyone that the ship had seen better days. He stared at the holographic display, the colorful chaos of their makeshift diversion slowly fading. They'd bought themselves a few precious minutes, but the Gralax Armada wasn't known for their patience, or their sense of humor. Juno, Thalos called, rubbing the persistent knot at the back of his neck. What's our status? Juno Vex, the crew's resident strategist, was already neck-deep in her console, fingers dancing frantically across the interface. The Gralax are regrouping faster than we'd like. They've deployed smaller gravity distortions to toy with our trajectory. The old interstellar cat and mouse game, Vera Black chimed in, her sarcasm a familiar comfort. Except with the mouse being battered around by a sadistic space cat. Thalos inhaled sharply, the weight of the situation pressing down. Okay, Juno, tell me you've got something up your sleeve. Juno drummed her fingers on the console, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. As a matter of fact, I might just have the kind of plan that would make a bureaucrat cry. Thalos couldn't resist a grin. Let's hear it. You know how the Gralax are sticklers for rules. Juno began, her tone hinting at a devilish scheme. They've got more red tape than a Christmas gift wrapping marathon. I found a loophole in their bureaucratic mess that we can exploit. Vera raised an eyebrow, skepticism mingling with intrigue. A loophole? In Gralax law? Color me curious. Juno nodded, warming to her topic. Their legal systems are as convoluted as a quantum physics textbook. They have this clause about honorable engagement, which specifies their forces must be officially sanctioned during pursuits. We can file a dispute, question their jurisdiction over this sector, and with the right timing, it should freeze their operations temporarily. Thalos considered this. A legal dispute, in the middle of a space battle? That's insane. Insane is our default setting, Juno replied with a smirk. But it might just work. The catch is, we need precise coordination to pull it off. We've got to time the transmission perfectly to interrupt their chain of command. Right, Thalos said, clapping his hands together. So, who do we need to piss off to get this started? First, we need Jenkins to patch into their comms without triggering alarms, Juno explained. Then, Vera will send the dispute notice at our designated time. Legal warfare, Vera mused. Who knew my pre-space law degree would come in handy? Does anyone else find it ironic, Thalos said, that our best plan involves filing a formal complaint? Hey, if bureaucracy can't solve it, nothing will, Vera shrugged, a grin tugging at her lips. Let's make it happen. Down in the bowels of the Dauntless, where the air was a cocktail of burnt circuits and sweat, Jenkins was knee-deep in systems that had been obsolete a century ago. He was the kind of guy who could charm a toaster into making you breakfast, so naturally, patching into alien communications was just another Tuesday. Jenkins, Vera barked over the comms. We need you to hack into the Gralax comms. Think you can do it without turning us into interstellar Swiss cheese? Piece of cake, Jenkins grunted, his voice a gravelly rasp. Just like hacking into a vending machine, only with more existential dread. You've got 10 minutes, Vera replied. No pressure. 10 minutes, I'll do it in 5, Jenkins shot back, already elbow deep in wires. As he worked, cursing the shoddy state of their equipment, the ship gave a bone-rattling jolt. Jenkins gripped the console, muttering darkly about the ship's resemblance to a tin can in a tumble dryer. With the grace of a disgruntled magician, Jenkins manipulated the controls, coaxing the ship's ancient systems to cooperate. He was a maestro of malfunction, orchestrating a symphony of sparks and sizzling circuits. Comms patched, Jenkins announced, his voice a triumphant growl. Now send your bloody lawsuit. Back on the bridge, Vera cracked her knuckles with the enthusiasm of someone about to prank call the galaxy's most humorless beings. Ready when you are, Captain. Thalos nodded, a smirk playing on his lips. Let's give the Gralax a taste of red tape. As the Gralax officer's face filled the screen, a scowl etched deep in his craggy features, Thalos feigned his best diplomatic posture. Gralax command, we're filing an official jurisdictional dispute. The officer blinked, as if caught off guard by a fly aiming for his soup. A dispute, now? Indeed, Thalos replied breezily. According to your own regulations, you need to cease hostilities until the matter is resolved. The Gralax officer sputtered, his expression a mix of outrage and disbelief. You can't do this. Just did, Vera chimed in, voice sugary sweet. The Gralax officer's face twisted with frustration, the gears of his mind visibly grinding. Our legal department will respond. But know this, Captain Zephyr, you have only delayed the inevitable. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in silence. Juno clapped her hands, a grin splitting her face. Nice work, team. They'll be tied up in bureaucratic knots for a bit. It's like tripping an elephant with a legal document, Vera remarked, smirking. They won't even know what hit them. Thalos exhaled, the tension momentarily lifting. They'd bought themselves time, again. Precious moments in which they could breathe, plan, and hope for a miracle, or at least a half-decent escape route. Let's keep moving, people, Thalos urged. We've got a window, let's make it count. As the Dauntless continued its precarious journey through the depths of space, Thalos marveled at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag band of outcasts, using the universe's oldest trick, paperwork. Against an enemy as relentless as the Gralax, it was the small victories that counted. Time passed in a blur of tense anticipation and frantic problem-solving. The Gralax weren't idle, and neither could they afford to be. Jenkins, Vera, and Juno worked tirelessly, their efforts a tangled web of ingenuity and desperation. Juno, ever the strategist, was on a caffeine-fueled roll. If we can maintain our current trajectory, we have a shot at reaching the asteroid field. What's the plan once we get there? Hide and seek with space rocks? Vera asked, already knowing the answer. Not exactly, Juno replied, her grin wolfish. We use the asteroids as cover, slipping between the bigger chunks to evade detection. It's not foolproof, but it's better than a sitting duck routine. Thalos nodded, appreciating the audacity of it. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Let's prepare for the jump. Assuming our hyperdrive doesn't decide to spontaneously combust, Jenkins added, ever the realist. Details, Vera said with a wave of her hand, as if dismissing cosmic mechanics as a minor inconvenience. As preparations continued, the crew clung to what hope they had, their camaraderie a bulwark against despair. Thalos couldn't help but admire his team, their resilience, and their stubborn refusal to give up. It was reckless, some might say suicidal, but it was undeniably human. Then, just as everything seemed to be aligning, the ship shuddered violently, the lights flickering ominously. Alarms blared, the sound a jarring wake-up call. Report, Thalos barked, heart racing. Gralax distortions, Juno yelled over the din. They're messing with our systems, trying to knock us off course. Because things weren't bad enough already, Jenkins muttered, wrestling with the controls. Thalos gritted his teeth, knuckles white on the armrests. Keep it together, people. We've come too far to let them swat us down now. With a grim determination, the crew redoubled their efforts. The Gralax were relentless, pressing their advantage with merciless precision. But the crew of the Dauntless was nothing if not resourceful. Juno's fingers flew over her console, eyes alight with a fierce resolve. If we reroute power from non-essential systems, we might stabilize our trajectory long enough to make the jump. Non-essential systems like life support, Vera quipped, her sarcasm cutting through the tension. Breathing's overrated, Jenkins grumbled. Let's do it. Thalos nodded. You heard her. Make it happen. As the crew scrambled to implement Juno's plan, the ship lurched again, the gravitich distortions threatening to tear them apart. It was a gamble, but one they were willing to take. Finally, against the odds, the ship stabilized, the hyperdrive whining in protest yet holding steady. With a collective breath, the crew locked in their course, the asteroid field looming ahead like a promise, and a warning. All right, Thalos said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Initiate the jump. With a flare of light, the Dauntless surged forward, the stars stretching into brilliant lines as they punched through the distortion field, aiming for the comparative sanctuary of the asteroid belt. As the ship shook and groaned, Vera's voice rang out, a defiant edge to her words. Hold on to your asses, everyone. We're not dead yet. And with that, the Dauntless plunged into the asteroid field, the crew hanging on by the skin of their teeth, ready to outmaneuver the Gralax one more time. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they'd found a sliver of hope. A slim chance, a reckless plan, and a crew too stubborn to die quietly. It wasn't a victory, but it was survival. And sometimes, that was enough. The Dauntless careened through the asteroid field with all the grace of a drunk trying to navigate a crowded bar. Captain Thalos Zephyr gripped the armrests of his chair, eyes glued to the holographic display that flickered ominously with each near miss. Keep your pants on, people, Thalos barked over the din of alarms and groaning metal. This isn't the time to start praying to whatever cosmic deity you believe in. Focus on not dying. In the pit of engineering, Jenkins was cursing in a language that only seemed to consist of expletives. Thalos, you ever consider this ship might be held together by spite and duct tape? Only every damn day, Thalos shot back, his voice laced with wry amusement. What's our status? Hyperdrive's holding, barely, Jenkins replied, his gravelly voice cut through static. But this ship's a sneeze away from coming apart. Good to know we're teetering on the brink as usual, Thalos muttered, more to himself than anyone else. In the chaos of the bridge, Juno Vex was a whirlwind of motion, her fingers dancing over her console. Our trajectory's stable, but we've got a bigger problem. The Gralax are activating their gravity weapon. Of course they are, Vera Black added, her sarcasm as thick as space sludge. Because things weren't bad enough. Thalos rubbed his temples, wishing for the millionth time that his job came with a manual titled, How Not to Die a Horrible Death in Space. All right, we need a plan, and fast. Juno's eyes gleamed with a manic energy born from desperation and too little sleep. I say we use the asteroids. We lure their weapon into firing, then dodge into cover. 2 birds, 1 planet-smashing stone. Sounds like a hell of a way to go, Vera chuckled darkly. But it just might work. Jenkins' voice crackled over the comms again. And what if they hit? Huh? We're talking instant transformation into space debris. Then let's not get hit, Thalos replied, more confident than he felt. We've faced worse odds. Name one time, Jenkins challenged. Remember the time with the space kraken and that reactor about to explode? Thalos offered. Fair point, Jenkins conceded, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The air on the bridge was thick with a kind of grim determination, the kind that comes from being too stubborn to roll over and die. Thalos took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like an unwelcome guest. All right, everyone, he said, voice firm. We're going to pull off this crazy stunt. I want all hands ready. Vera, status on the weapon systems. Online and awaiting orders, Captain, Vera reported, her voice carrying a steely edge. Good, we'll need them if we get cornered. The Dauntless wove through the asteroids, each massive rock a potential savior or executioner. Thalos watched the Gralax ships, their sleek forms a stark contrast to his own battered vessel. They were closing in, the predators scenting blood. Here they come, Juno announced, her eyes locked on the display. Time for some evasive maneuvers, Thalos said. Let's see if we can make them hit their own damn rocks. As the Gralax ships opened fire, Vera and Juno coordinated their response, the Dauntless twisting and turning through the field. The crew worked in tense synchronization, their lives balanced on a knife's edge. Lining up for a shot, Vera called out, her fingers dancing over the controls. The ship shuddered as they fired back, the weapons systems straining under the pressure. Each shot was a prayer sent into the void, hoping to hit something vital. Gravity weapon charging, Juno warned, her voice an urgent whisper. Thalos watched as the Gralax ships maneuvered into position, their weapons' ominous glow casting long shadows on the asteroids around them. Now or never, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. On your mark, Captain, Juno said, poised to execute their plan. The moment stretched into eternity, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Thalos knew they were standing on the precipice, but hell, it was better than standing still. Mark, he shouted. Juno sprang into action, the Dauntless diving into a cluster of asteroids just as the Gralax fired their gravity weapon. The massive beam of energy erupted from the enemy ship, a harbinger of annihilation. The Dauntless skidded through the asteroid field, the gravity distortions tugging at the ship. Thalos held his breath, the seconds ticking by like a countdown to oblivion. Then, with a cataclysmic roar, the gravity weapon slammed into the asteroids, shattering them in a furious cascade of debris. The enemy's own shot rebounded, a tidal wave of destruction turning back on its maker. Son of a bitch, Jenkins crowed over the comms, a note of incredulous joy in his voice. They hit their own damn ships. Thalos exhaled, the tension rolling off him in waves. Don't celebrate yet, Jenkins. We're not out of this mess. Vera's laugh crackled through the comms, a sound of defiant triumph. But it's a damn good start. The Gralax fleet reeled from their miscalculation, their ranks thrown into disarray. It was a brief respite, but one they desperately needed. Thalos felt a flicker of hope, the first in what felt like an eternity. Let's make the most of this, he said, determination threading through his words. Juno, plot a course through the debris. Vera, keep our defenses up. Jenkins, make sure nothing falls apart. Aye, Captain, they chorused, the camaraderie knit tighter by shared danger. As the Dauntless slipped through the chaos, Thalos allowed himself a small smile. They'd bought themselves time to plan, time to breathe. It wasn't much, but it was something. The Gralax were regrouping, their pride bruised but their resolve unbroken. Thalos knew this was just the beginning of a longer fight, one that would test every ounce of their endurance. Captain, Vera's voice broke through his thoughts. We're still facing a hell of a fight, but that was a damn fine move. Yeah, Thalos said, his smile widening. Sometimes, it pays to be a stubborn bastard. Juno chimed in, her voice a mix of admiration and teasing. I always said you'd make a great con artist, Captain. Conning's half the job, Thalos replied, a chuckle in his voice. The other half is convincing everyone you're not making it up as you go. As the Dauntless moved through the asteroid field, the crew worked tirelessly, their determination a bulwark against the encroaching despair. It wasn't over, far from it, but they'd managed to strike a blow and live to tell the tale. In the grim void of space, where death lurked at every corner, they'd found a way to keep fighting. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the odds, not the enemy's power, but the simple, stubborn refusal to give in. Let's keep moving, Thalos said, his voice a rallying cry. We've got a long way to go, and I'll be damned if we don't make it. With a renewed sense of purpose, the Dauntless and her crew plunged forward, a defiant blip in the vastness of space. Outnumbered, outgunned, but never out of the fight. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they'd carved out a space for hope. With the Gralax ships temporarily licking their wounds and Jenkins still cursing the ship's very existence, Captain Thalos Zephyr found a brief and unwelcome moment to think. Usually, such moments only led to one thing: more problems. Vera, Thalos called over the comms. Any chance we've got a secret weapon stashed somewhere I don't know about? Preferably one that's shiny and says, "Get out of death free," on it. Vera snorted, leaning back from her console with a satisfied click. Unless you count my sparkling wit, Captain, we're fresh out. Hell, Vera, I could use a laugh right about now, Thalos replied, scanning the bridge as if humor might be tucked away in some forgotten corner. How's everyone doing? Still here, still kicking, Juno Vex said, her voice carrying the kind of optimism usually reserved for people who hadn't yet been shot at by an entire armada. Speaking of surprises, Juno added, I was digging through the old protocols. Turns out, there's a forgotten human override that might just give the Gralax's tech a bit of indigestion. Jenkins chimed in, voice crackling with skepticism. You found an ancient cheat code, Juno? What's next, bringing down a star with a paperclip? No, Jenkins, Juno retorted, but if I find one, you'll be the first to know. Let's hear it, then, Thalos urged, curiosity piqued. We could use an ace up our sleeve that isn't just lint and broken dreams. Juno cleared her throat, eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and exhaustion. It's an old transmission protocol, buried deep in an archive. The Gralax tech is surprisingly susceptible to it. Could throw their targeting systems off for a bit, maybe even disrupt their precious gravity weapons. Old tech beats new tech. Who'd have thunk, Vera quipped, smirking at her screen. Better than every damn upgrade we've tried to patch on board. All right, Thalos said, nodding decisively. We'll prep this new magic trick of yours. Vera, Jenkins, make sure the ship doesn't disintegrate when we pull this off. Jenkins' laugh was bitter and dry. Captain, I'll make sure she holds together with nothing but duct tape and a prayer. That's what I call a Tuesday. So, distraction and maneuvering it is, Thalos concluded. Let's give those Gralax bastards something to think about other than how best to turn us into cosmic dust. As Juno set to work, her fingers playing a concerto on the console, Thalos watched the holographic display flicker with the ship's erratic dance through the debris. Time to show the universe that human ingenuity didn't die with the last engineer who swapped out for a robot, Thalos said, his words carrying the weight of stubborn hope. Vera couldn't help but throw in her 2 cents. You mean that time Jenkins nearly lost to an automated plunger? Hey, that thing was unfairly equipped. Jenkins shot back, feigning offense. Besides, I won, didn't I? Sure, Jenkins, if winning means chasing it down the hallway with a wrench, Vera replied, her grin audible over the comm. Juno flashed a grin at their banter, her fingers never slowing. Okay, I've got the protocol ready. On your command, Captain. Thalos glanced at the crew, a ragtag team of misfits and smartasses, but damn if they weren't the best chance he had. All right, people, let's throw them the curveball of the century. On it, Juno affirmed, pressing a sequence that set the ancient protocol into motion. The ship's systems hummed with a sudden infusion of old-school defiance. The Gralax ships, sleek and deadly in their precision, began to fumble. Their formations faltered, targeting systems flickering like a failing neon sign in a forgotten red light district. Look at that, Vera said, astonished. They're tripping over themselves. Juno, Thalos praised, you just made the Gralax look like they're trying to park a cruiser after a night at the space bar. Don't get used to it, Juno replied. This is a one-time deal. Once they figure it out, they'll be back on us like flies on a corpse. Noted, Thalos said, his mind already leaping ahead. Vera, open a channel to the Gralax. Let's see if we can exploit their confusion. Vera raised an eyebrow, but complied, her hands deftly adjusting the comms. Gralax Armada, she announced, her voice dripping with false cheer, this is the UNS Dauntless. We'd like to discuss your concept of honorable surrender, perhaps over tea and biscuits. Or maybe a nice game of cards, Jenkins mumbled, where the loser gets to not die. A guttural voice came through the speakers, harsh and echoing, filled with the kind of disdain usually reserved for ancient enemies or telemarketers. Human vessel Dauntless, you dare contact us? Call it what you will, Thalos replied, smooth as the zero-gravity ride they all wished they were on. But I believe your ultimatum mentioned honorable surrender. We're just curious what your definition of honorable might be. There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough for you to wonder if you'd accidentally insulted someone's grandmother. Then, the Gralax commander spoke, grudgingly. State your terms. Vera's grin was wolfish. Looks like they're listening. What next, Captain? Keep them talking, Thalos said, eyes fixed on the flickering display. Every second we buy is another second they can't shoot us. Gralax Armada, Vera continued, we propose a temporary cessation of hostilities. Let's say, until we both figure out which end is up after that glorious bit of chaos. And why should we agree to this ceasefire? The Gralax commander sneered, skepticism clear. Because, Thalos interjected, your weapon systems are currently experiencing a technical difficulty, and you wouldn't want to lose more ships to an honor-bound misunderstanding, would you? The line buzzed with static, the universal language of interstellar annoyance. You test our patience, human. Consider it character building, Jenkins muttered, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. Or maybe a cosmic prank. Or, Juno added, a chance to take a breather before we all go back to trying to kill each other. The Gralax commander's reply came after a tense silence, each second stretching into eternity. Very well, a temporary truce. But be warned, human, our patience is not infinite. Neither's our luck, Thalos replied dryly. We'll be in touch. As the channel went silent, the bridge erupted in a mix of relieved laughter and cheers, the tension momentarily lifting like a fog. Well, Vera said, clapping her hands together, looks like we've got a bit of breathing room. What now, Captain? Thalos leaned back, allowing himself a rare moment of relaxation. Now, we regroup and figure out what the hell we're going to do next. Jenkins, how's the hyperdrive looking? Jenkins ran a hand through his hair, exhaling with exaggerated weariness. It's holding, Captain, but barely. Like a cat hanging from a ceiling fan. I'll see what I can scrounge up to keep it purring. Juno, keep monitoring their movements. If they so much as twitch, I want to know about it, Thalos instructed. Vera, you and I going to figure out how to negotiate with these rock-headed lizards without getting incinerated. Aye, Captain, Vera responded, her voice a mix of determination and lingering adrenaline. Thalos surveyed the bridge, the crew moving with a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the odds, they'd managed to claw a lifeline from the jaws of certain doom. Sometimes, Thalos mused, I think the universe just likes to see us squirm. But damn if we don't keep on kicking. Juno chuckled, her eyes never leaving the console. That's because humans are cockroaches of the galaxy, Captain. We adapt, survive, and generally piss off anyone who tries to step on us. And we do it with style, Vera added with a wink. As the Dauntless drifted through the asteroid field, a battered but unbeaten ship, the crew set to work, their spirits lifted by the promise of another day. In the vast, uncaring void of space, they'd found a brief reprieve, a sliver of hope carved from human tenacity. Thalos knew the road ahead was perilous, but with his crew beside him, he felt ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. All right, people, he said, his voice strong and steady. Let's get to work. We've got a ceasefire to exploit and a plan to hatch. And remember, if anyone asks, we're professionals. The bridge erupted in laughter, the sound carrying through the ship like a beacon in the darkness. Together, they would navigate the chaos, defy the odds, and continue to fight for survival. One breath, one battle, one snarky comment at a time. Captain Thalos Zephyr leaned back in his chair, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth like a stubborn dog with a bone. The ship was still holding, which was more than he could say for his nerves. Vera, he drawled, how's our comms looking? Got any more Gralax listeners out there pretending to be interested in polite conversation? Vera Black, eyes glued to the console like a hawk watching a particularly juicy mouse, didn't miss a beat. Well, Captain, if by polite conversation you mean threatening us with annihilation because we bruised their ego, then yeah, they're all ears. Like the universe's worst call center. Good, Thalos replied lazily. I've got a bureaucratic masterpiece cooking up that'll make their heads spin. You ready to tango with Gralax red tape? I do love a good dance, Vera quipped, her fingers dancing across the controls. Especially when it's with someone else's laws. Jenkins leaned against the wall, crossing his arms and smirking as if he had a front row seat to the galaxy's most entertaining farce. Gralax bureaucracy, heard it's like a never-ending spiral of forms and regulations. Perfect for a slow, torturous demise. You know it, Jenkins, Juno said from the other side of the bridge, where she was still monitoring Gralax movements. But the good news is, they're as tangled in it as we are. Maybe more, if we play our cards right. Thalos chuckled, a sound like gravel scraping over metal. That's the plan, Juno. We throw enough paper at him, metaphorically speaking, and watch them drown in it. The bridge settled into a quiet hum as Vera worked her magic on the comms, patching in the necessary frequencies and encryptions. A brief moment of silence followed as the team prepared for the next round of verbal fencing. When the Gralax commander, a lovely specimen who probably had nightmares about protocol, returned to the airwaves, you could almost hear the collective groan across the bridge. Human vessel Dauntless, what is the nature of your contact? Commander, Thalos said, his voice syrupy with false charm. We find ourselves in a bit of a predicament regarding your offer of honorable surrender. It seems there are some discrepancies in your documentation. The commander bristled, his disdain palpable even over the distorted audio. Our documentation is beyond reproach, human. I'm sure it is, Thalos replied smoothly. But, you see, according to the Intergalactic Code of Conflict, subsection 17, clause 4, paragraph 6, if we're being precise, you've entered our territory without the proper notifications filed with the Unified Colonial Administration. Vera chimed in, her voice a smug purr. And without those notifications, Commander, any hostile engagements could be considered void. Which, according to section 23, subpoint B, means your entire pursuit is technically illegal. Illegal pursuits often have unfortunate consequences, Jenkins muttered with a grin, like fines, or worse, a court summons. Galactic courts are a killer. Preposterous, the Gralax commander spluttered. We have every right to pursue and engage under our own laws. But there's the rub, Thalos interjected, like a lawyer who had just found a loophole bigger than a black hole. Your laws are subordinate to the very agreement your people signed with the Unified Colonial Administration. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, Commander. The commander went silent, probably attempting to wrap his mind around the bureaucratic web that was fast closing in on him like a trap. This is a trick, he finally spat. Trick? Oh no, Vera said, feigning innocence. Just good old-fashioned paperwork. Lovely stuff, really. Juno watched the exchange with an almost gleeful expression. So, what's the next step? Get him to fill out Form 146B while we sip coffee and watch the show. Something like that, Thalos said. But first, we need to make sure they're really caught on this hook. The Gralax commander, sounding as if he was chewing on a mouthful of defeat, responded with less vigor. What do you propose, human? Simple, Thalos said, shifting gears to a more conciliatory tone. You withdraw your forces from our immediate space, and we'll help you navigate the documentation to clear up this misunderstanding. Not to mention, Vera added, it gives you time to recalibrate your weapons. Wouldn't want another, technical difficulty, would we? Jenkins snorted, barely containing his laughter. Or they could spend the time learning how to park, without hitting every metaphorical pylon in the star system. A long pause stretched between them, the commander likely considering the potential fallout from either choice. Finally, like a man resigned to his fate, he replied, we will consider your proposal. Excellent, Thalos said, nodding as if they were old friends now. We'll send over the first set of forms. Start with those, and we'll guide you through the rest. The commander cut the link, and Thalos leaned back, a satisfied smirk stretching across his face. Well, that went better than expected. Human ingenuity strikes again, Vera said, giving him a mock salute. Juno, still scanning the monitors, added, let's just hope they're not as fast at bureaucracy as they are at firing those gravity hammers. Always the optimist, Juno, Jenkins said, pretending to wipe away a tear. You're the reason I wake up and face the impending doom every day. Glad to be of service, Juno replied, a mischievous glint in her eye. The rest of the crew set to their respective tasks, a renewed energy in their movements. The battle of wits might not have been as visceral as the heat of combat, but it was no less crucial. If anything, it required a different kind of finesse, one that humanity had honed over countless years of juggling red tape and regulations. As they worked, Thalos kept a watchful eye on the time. The ceasefire was temporary, and there was no telling when the Gralax would decide they'd had enough of playing office politics. Vera, as soon as we have their confirmation, start patching the hyperdrive with whatever Jenkins has managed to cobble together. Already on it, Captain, Vera said. With our luck, we'll need a quick exit sooner rather than later. And Jenkins, Thalos continued, make sure that hyperdrive doesn't blow us to pieces the moment we punch it. I'd rather not end up as space debris today. Jenkins gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. I'll keep it from turning us into an impromptu fireworks display. For a moment, the bridge was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the ship's life support and the soft tapping of keyboards. It was a rare respite, and for once, the silence was welcome. "Do you think they'll bite?" Juno asked after a while, glancing at Thalos. "On the whole paperwork thing? Do stars shine?" Thalos replied, eyebrow quirking. "It's the kind of irony the universe loves. All that firepower, and it's a bit of legalese that stops them." "Well," Vera said, grinning, "here's hoping their legal team is as incompetent as their targeting systems." Jenkins chuckled. "With any luck, they're already buried under a mountain of forms, wondering if they'll ever see daylight again." The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. But eventually, the console blinked with a new message, the kind that promised more than just threats and bluster. The Gralax were asking for clarification on several points, proof that the Gambit was taking root. "Looks like they're biting," Thalos said, nodding with satisfaction. "Vera, keep them tied up with as much paperwork as you can muster. Let's make sure they're too busy to remember how much they hate us." "On it, Captain," Vera said. "Let's see how they handle the joy that is interstellar bureaucracy." Jenkins leaned back, crossing his arms with a satisfied sigh. "You know, for all the doom and gloom, there's something deeply satisfying about watching the mighty brought low by the minutiae of office work." Juno grinned. "It's like watching a lion get caught in a spider's web. Unexpected, but damn entertaining." As the bridge settled into a steady rhythm, the crew continuing their myriad tasks, a shared sense of accomplishment lingered in the air. Against all odds, they'd managed to stall the Gralax, if only temporarily, and in doing so, they'd bought themselves precious time. Thalos allowed himself a moment of quiet contemplation, the weight of command momentarily lifted. They were still in the thick of it, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt that they were on the right path. "All right, team," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Let's make sure we keep this edge. We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got a plan, and we've got each other." Vera, Juno, and Jenkins shared a look, the camaraderie between them unspoken but deeply felt. They'd faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. Now it was just a matter of keeping the momentum going. "Here's to surviving another day," Jenkins said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast to the universe's indifferent vastness. "And making the Gralax regret ever crossing paths with us," Juno added, her smile wide and unyielding. As the Dauntless continued its journey through the stars, a ship held together by little more than hope and stubborn defiance, Thalos felt the flicker of optimism take root. They were far from victory, but they were still standing, still fighting. And sometimes, that was enough. "Keep your eyes sharp and your wits sharper," Thalos said, his gaze sweeping over his crew. "We've got a long road ahead, but we'll get through it. One step, one laugh, one ridiculous loophole at a time." With that, they returned to their duties, ready to face whatever came next with a mix of courage, sarcasm, and the unyielding tenacity that only humanity could muster. The UNS Dauntless drifted silently through the cosmic void, its patched hull a monument to human stubbornness more than any real structural integrity. The Gralax ships had withdrawn, possibly due to a bureaucratic migraine induced by Thalos and Vera's relentless paperwork barrage. For now, at least, the Dauntless was safe. Well, as safe as a rust bucket in space could ever be. On the bridge, Thalos leaned back in his chair, a faint creak suggesting that even the furniture was on the verge of giving up. "Well, folks, it seems the universe hasn't imploded on us today. Might be the best news we've had all week. At this rate, we'll have a holiday declared," Vera replied, her fingers tapping away at her console. Intergalactic Ceasefire Day, celebrated with cold rations and recycled air, the classics. "Don't forget the vintage aroma of burnt wiring," Jenkins added, punctuating his words with a mock sniff. "It's like fine wine, but for spaceships." Thalos chuckled, though it was more a release of tension than genuine mirth. He swiveled his chair, eyeing the bridge crew with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "You know, I'm almost impressed. We managed to outwit a superior alien force with nothing but legalese and sheer audacity." "Humanity's greatest assets," Juno quipped, her eyes still flicking over the sensor readouts. "That and our stubborn refusal to die quietly." Vera glanced up, her eyes narrowing with a hint of mischief. "So, Captain, what's the grand plan? I assume it involves more than just drifting aimlessly until the Gralax realize they're being outsmarted by paperwork." Thalos sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We need a new course. Somewhere the Gralax won't follow us immediately." "Suggestions?" Juno tapped a few keys, bringing up a holographic display of nearby systems. "There's a cluster of uninhabited planets in the Arnion sector. Not exactly a vacation spot, but it'll do for a breather." "Ah, yes, the Arnion sector," Jenkins mused. "Known for its thrilling collection of rocks and more rocks. Truly, the height of luxury." Better than our current situation, Vera pointed out, which is somewhere between a rock and total annihilation. And here I thought I signed up for adventure, Jenkins mocked, stretching his arms dramatically. Instead, I'm treated to the wonders of bureaucracy and the thrill of emergency repairs. Adventure's just another word for horrible experience that sounds cool when retold, Thalos said. Plot a course for Arnion, Juno. Let's get moving before the Gralax decide to get creative. With a few deft keystrokes, Juno redirected the ship, the stars outside shifting as the Dauntless adjusted its trajectory. Thalos watched the display, the swirling constellations a distant reminder of how vast and deadly space could be. Hyperdrive status, Jenkins? Thalos asked, hoping for once not to hear the word catastrophic. Jenkins glanced over the readouts, his expression suggesting a reluctant optimism. Barely functional, but functional enough. Like my last relationship. Let's just hope it doesn't end with us in pieces, Vera muttered, earning a collective groan from the crew. As the Dauntless powered through the void, Thalos let himself relax, if only slightly. They had a plan and a destination, two things that had been in short supply recently. He turned his chair to face the crew, the familiar faces that had, against all odds, become a semblance of family during their ordeal. Listen, Thalos said, feeling oddly sentimental, we've done the impossible more times than I can count. Whatever happens next, I want you all to know you've done humanity proud. Vera raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at her lips. Careful, Captain, you're starting to sound like a motivational poster. Never thought I'd see the day, Jenkins added, his grin wide. Next, you'll be telling us to follow our dreams. Dreams are overrated, Thalos replied, deadpan. It's nightmares that keep you alive out here. Juno laughed, a bright sound that cut through the tension. And here I thought it was the constant threat of death. That too, Thalos admitted with a wry smile. But seriously, let's not get complacent. The Gralax might be tangled up in their own red tape, but they're not stupid. Agreed, Vera said, turning back to her console. I'll keep an eye on communications. If they so much as sneeze in our direction, we'll know. Jenkins, how's our supply situation? Thalos asked, knowing full well the answer would likely ruin his mood. Running low on essentials, Jenkins reported, his tone flat. Food's gonna be an issue soon. Unless anyone's developed a taste for recycled air. Not yet, Juno interjected. But I'm sure it pairs well with existential dread. Alright, Thalos said, rubbing his temples. Let's focus on keeping the ship together and finding somewhere we can restock. Worst case, we barter with whatever salvage we can find in Arnion. The conversation drifted into a comfortable silence, the crew each absorbed in their tasks. The ship hummed steadily, the hyperdrive miraculously holding together despite its cobbled-together nature. Thalos glanced at the streaking stars, a reminder of the speed at which they hurtled through space. It was a journey that defied human understanding, yet here they were, mere mortals, navigating the cosmos. Ever think about what comes after this? Juno asked, breaking the silence. Assuming we don't end up as space dust. Thalos shrugged, a gesture heavy with uncertainty. Maybe we find a new home, someplace the Gralax or any other interstellar bureaucrats won't bother us. Start fresh. A fresh start, Jenkins said wistfully. Sounds nice. Maybe open a little shop, sell genuine human relics to alien tourists. Not sure broken hyperdrive parts count as relics, Vera noted dryly. Everything's a relic if you wait long enough, Jenkins replied with a wink. Thalos chuckled, the banter a balm for his frayed nerves. It was the kind of conversation that made the endless void feel a bit less intimidating, a reminder that despite everything, they were still human, still capable of humor and hope. The hours passed in a blur of routine checks and idle chatter, the hum of the ship a constant companion. It wasn't long before the Arnion sector loomed on the horizon, its planets little more than specks against the backdrop of infinity. Approaching Arnion, Juno announced, her gaze fixed on the sensors. Nothing on scanners, but that doesn't mean much. Keep us steady, Thalos ordered. Vera, any luck on the comms? I'd rather not be surprised by squatters. No signals, Vera confirmed. Looks like we're the only fools out this way. Perfect, Thalos said, leaning forward. Let's find a nice, quiet rock to park on. See if we can figure out our next move. As the Dauntless glided toward the planets, Thalos couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. They'd escaped the immediate threat, bought themselves a reprieve, however short-lived. It was a victory in itself, one they could savor before the universe inevitably threw its next curveball. The planet they settled on was as unremarkable as any other in the sector, a barren wasteland dotted with craters and the occasional dead tree struggling against the elements. Yet it was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where they could breathe easy, if only for a moment. Home sweet home, Jenkins said, feigning enthusiasm as the ship settled onto the rocky surface. Better than floating in space with a Gralax target on our backs, Juno replied, powering down the engines. Let's use this time wisely, Thalos instructed, rising from his chair. Get repairs underway, and see what we can scavenge from the surroundings. We need to prepare for whatever comes next. The crew dispersed, each member diving into their tasks with a practiced efficiency. Vera focused on the long-range comms, hoping to pick up any signals that might indicate potential allies or threats. Jenkins set about inspecting the ship's exterior, muttering curses at every dent and scrape he found. Juno began cataloging their remaining supplies, her expression grim as she tallied up their dwindling resources. Thalos wandered the ship, checking in with each crew member, offering encouragement where he could. It was a delicate balance, maintaining morale while acknowledging the precariousness of their situation. But Thalos had long since learned that leadership was as much about optimism as it was about realism. As night fell on the barren planet, the crew gathered in the mess, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the room. They shared a simple meal, the conversation light but tinged with an underlying tension. There was no escaping the reality that they were far from safety, from the comforts of home. Yet despite the odds stacked against them, Thalos felt a flicker of hope. They'd come this far, survived threats that would have crushed lesser crews. It wasn't just the ship held together by spite and duct tape, it was them, the ragtag band of misfits who had formed a bond stronger than any force in the universe. To survival, Thalos said, raising his cup in a toast. To paperwork, Vera added with a smirk. To the Gralax, Jenkins said, and their newfound love of forms. And to us, Juno concluded, her gaze warm as she looked at each of them in turn. They drank, the silence settling comfortably around them. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no immediate threat, no urgent crisis to manage. Just the quiet companionship of those who'd faced the abyss and refused to blink. Thalos leaned back, his eyes drifting to the starlit sky visible through the mess's small viewport. The universe was vast and unforgiving, a place where the strong devoured the weak. Yet here they were, defying the odds, carving out a fragile existence amid the chaos. As he sat there, surrounded by his crew, Thalos couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They'd forged something special, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. No matter what the universe threw at them next, he knew they'd face it together, unyielding and unafraid. All right, Thalos said, breaking the comfortable quiet. Let's get some rest. We've got a lot to do tomorrow, and I expect us all to be in top form, in case we need to save the galaxy with more paperwork. The crew laughed, their spirits lifted by the familiar banter. They dispersed to their quarters, one by one, leaving Thalos alone in the mess, the silence wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. He stayed a while longer, watching the stars, each one a distant world filled with untold wonders and dangers. They were just a small ship in an indifferent universe, yet they'd carved out a place for themselves against all odds. With a final glance at the starry sky, Thalos rose and headed for his quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to overcome. But for now, he took solace in the knowledge that they were still standing, still fighting, together. And sometimes, Thalos thought as he made his way down the dimly lit corridor, that was enough.